Hey losers, I'm Coral. Welcome to my channel. If you're joining me for the first time, I mostly read things that are strange and unsettling. So if you're into that, welcome to the party. I'm here today with the books that I finished in the first half of October. I've been participating in Halloween-a-thon. I've read a few spooky horror novellas. I've had a really good time so far. I've watched lots of good movies. I've been doing this thing, right, for Halloween-a-thon where I made my own game board. So like I roll a dice, I use my game board to randomize what I'm doing, right? So mostly it's been movies and novellas, because that's how I designed it. And it did include some activities in that as well, but like I didn't anticipate that I would like not be doing any activities practically, so that's been a little bit of a bummer. I've only rolled one activity so far, which was fun, but I'm like, come on. And it's like I could do the activities, but I could do them separately, which maybe I will at this point because it's halfway through October. But anyway, so I'm here with the books that I've finished so far. 9 of them. Well, technically 10 actually. I have 2 DNFs, which I included one DNF in my count and then like didn't include the other one. I don't know why. My brain, who knows. But I'm going to talk about all of them. So here are my stats for this month. In total, 10 books. 3 of these were off of my TBR, so those are books that I owned previous to this year. 2 of them were DNFs. I read a total of 1,525 pages, which is about 101 pages per day. 7 of these were horror books. 1 was a nonfiction self-help book. I read this for school, but I'm including this in my count because I read the whole fucking book. 2 of these books were true crime books. The oldest book I read this month came out in 1926 and the most recent 2024. Read a couple 2024 books. None of these books so far this month were in series. And then let's get on with it. Starting with the books, because accidentally at the end of last month I forgot to include a book that I listened to on audio because I didn't have it in front of me. So let's start with the books, of course, as always, that I do not have copies of. So that will be first, Guillotine by Delilah S. Dawson. This is a 2024 release. I had a copy of this from Libro FM, from the ALC program. This is her most recent release, and this was really fun. This was about a young woman named Des who is recently finished up with like fashion school, but she's having a hard time securing a job now in this line of work because she does not have any experience. And it's like, how do you get experience then if you cannot find a job doing this? You know how it is. This is just like one of the most frustrating things about going to school. It's like, okay, these people expect you to have experience, but how do you get experience if all the jobs are like not entry level, you know? She comes up with this unorthodox plan though, and that is that she meets a young man at a bar one night and discovers that he is the son of a woman who owns a fashion magazine. From a very wealthy family, and he is interested in her, but she's really uninterested in him. However, she thinks that probably this is a way to meet his mother, and like if she meets his mother, maybe this is a way to get a job at this magazine. So eventually she is invited to a family function. This takes place on this secluded island, and she realizes very quickly that it's like way more serious than she thought it would be. She has to sign like an NDA and stuff to even set foot on the island, and then like very quickly things get estranged on this island. Like, the family is weird, and events on the island get very weird. And this was just a great, like, eat the rich kind of story. It's very fast-paced. It's very short. I listened to this in like one afternoon. It's novella length, so very easy and quick to, very easy to finish if you just sit down in one sitting, I would imagine. I just wanted to know like what was going to happen to the characters in the story. You know, the sequence of events, you're like, how did this happen? How did we get here? What has this family been doing? So it's very intriguing and kind of weird and disturbing and sad and very interesting. And then next I also listened to Cult Following by J.W. Ocker. This was also a choice from the ALC program by Libra FM. And this was a nonfiction true crime book about cults. And I was really appreciative because this did talk about some of the like more well-known ones, like People's Temple, what's the David Koresh one? Heaven's Gate. Wait, no, Heaven's Gate was the Nikes Comet one, right? I don't know. You know, all like the heavy hitter ones that we've heard about, like Charles Manson, but it did also include a lot of, you know, sects that I hadn't heard of before. So it wasn't super in-depth about these, but like some of these, I'm assuming there isn't a ton of information on anyway, because some of them were cults from different countries, and some of them I'm assuming the author probably couldn't get a ton of information on. So it was just enough information to understand what had happened, and it wasn't like a full book on each of these anyways. It was just a little information on each, and then we move on, you know, and it was interesting. And I enjoyed this. This was good too. And like I said, I appreciated that it wasn't just the ones that everyone has heard about already. You know, people who listen to true crime, watch true crime, like me, I've been doing this for what feels like my whole life, you know? And so I was interested in this, but then when I was thinking about it, I was like, oh no, am I just going to be hearing about Charles Manson for the 150th time? And then I was really interested to hear about people who think that they survive, or people who say that they survive on only air, right? And you're like, what? So this was definitely really interesting. Okay, and then the two books that I ended up DNFing this month. The first one was A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. I picked this up because my library had an audio copy, and I've been thinking about how sometimes there are books on my shelves, right, that I've, like this one for instance, came in a Nightworms package. I didn't pick this for myself necessarily, and this probably isn't a book that I would have picked for myself. It's not one that sounded particularly interesting to me when I got it in this package, and I was really inclined to just let it sit there. But instead I was like, okay, I needed an audiobook to listen to, and so why not try to do that? And so I was gonna listen to it. That's why I picked it up. But unfortunately, I didn't really like this. This is, I think, supposed to be somewhat of like a Frankenstein-y story where there are these two men. I believe they're partners, like romantic partners, lovers. One is a taxidermist and one is a botanist, and this takes place definitely in an old-timey, like almost Victorian feeling setting. I don't know if it explicitly says, it definitely doesn't. Okay, late 1800s, just kidding. So it does say in the book. I flipped to like an excerpt where there is a journal journal excerpt. So the botanist has found this sample somewhere outside of where they're living, and it's like a fungus, but it also has like an orchid, which is different than like normal fungus and orchids that we see. So he sends it back to himself in, I think that they're in England. Yeah, they're in London, and it says here Victorian London. Okay, so he is like really excited about the sample, right? And like eventually I believe they create from a corpse this fungus with their taxonomical and botanical skills, a living dead thing, right? I just didn't jive with what I listened to, and I kind of thought that I wouldn't, but instead of letting this languish on my shelves, I decided to not do that. And you know, I didn't like it, but now I know it's not gonna sit on my shelves for 4 years until I don't know, unhaul it or something. Now it's going to find a home somewhere else. And then the other book I DNF'd, this was one that I pulled doing my Halloween-a-thon stuff. This is The House on Abigail Lane by Kealan Burke. And this is kind of a haunted house story. Well, it is a haunted house story. It's about this house on Abigail Lane where these strange happenings occur, these strange occurrences occur. And it's like everyone who lives in this house, like something terrible happens and these people disappear from these families. But it's, I don't know, I didn't even like finish it even though it's so short. I read like 30 or 40 pages and it just felt like the same thing was happening over and over. It was like someone walks in and then they disappear kind of a thing. And there was more to that. There was like, oh, a giant clown, or the neighbors wake up in the middle of the night, like all these sleepwalkers stand outside their house, or, you know, things like that. But it just felt like it was snippets of a story over and over and not an actual story. It just didn't end up. I spent too much time reading it and not being interested in it, so it was a DNF for me. That book came out in 2020. I also read or reread The Nest by Gregory A. Douglas. I listened to an audio copy of this. This came out in 1980. This is a killer cockroach story, and I'm going to be doing a separate review on this, so that's all I'll say for now. And then my book for my business class was The Richest Man in Babylon. This came out in 1926. This is by a man named George S. Clawson, and this was like money parables basically, where like the premise of this is like we found a bunch of tablets in Babylon explaining why Babylon was so successful, and then you're supposed to read this and discover why. And like it has good information in it, I guess, but some of it just doesn't translate to now, right? Like some of it is like, buy a house. And it's like, but if you are working 2 jobs and you can't save money because your rent is so fucking high, like how can you know, some of it just isn't practical for now. Some of it is, some of it's great. It's like, you know, making sure you pay yourself, as in saving money, before any other expenses are paid, you know, as much as you can. Some of it's about investing, but that's way more simplistic if you're talking about like, I gave some money to a camel man. And it's like, okay, well, I can't just give my money to a camel man. I need to know more about investing than just that. So, you know, it is what it is. Then I finally read a filthy loot book. This is Soft Ceremonies, and this is a anthology with stories by Charlene Ellsby, Joe Coach, Sam Richard, and John Steffens. Ooh, this was really short, 4 short stories. This was really good. I liked this very much. And I don't really even know what to tell you about this except for that it made me squirm, and it crossed a line in a good way. There are like stories about grief and childhood. Oh, the last story especially like really got me. I don't know what to tell you more than that. That also came out in 2024. Then I read Man Fuck This House, which came out in 2021. This is by Brian Asman, and this is another haunted house story, but not quite your typical haunted house story. This is about a family called the Haskins, and they've moved into like a little suburban, it's kind of like a cul-de-sac, I feel like. Like there's just a couple houses right there, and their house, it seems fine to everyone except for the mother. Like only the mother starts to have strange occurrences, and she starts to maybe feel like she is like she's delusional. And her family even starts to sort of treat her that way too, which is a little bit unfair, don't you think? But is it the mother or is it the house? You have to read it to find out. But I did really enjoy this, like more than I expected to, honestly. It was like just humorous enough, not super like scary or anything. I would say that this is probably a little bit of a horror comedy. The ending is a little bit sad. I really liked the characters in this. The children especially, they're kind of little shits, but not in an over-the-top way. Yeah, the characterization in this was really good, and I really liked this. I also read Deadly Voices by C.L. Swinney. This came out in 2015, and this is a true crime novel about Herbert Mullen, who was a spree killer. He had paranoid schizophrenia, and he killed people because he thought that death was preventing a massive earthquake from happening on the West Coast. And this was in the 70s, so at first he thought that the Vietnam War, I believe it was the Vietnam War, does that timeline match? He thought that was like tiding things over, right? But then when the Vietnam War stopped, he's like, oh no, like not enough people are being killed. So then he was hearing voices telling him that he needed to kill people to like hold off this earthquake, and there were like synchronicities in his life that were like aiding this delusion, right? Like he had been born on the anniversary of the San Francisco earthquake and things like that. So he was a really sick dude, and he just killed indiscriminately. It's very sad, but I don't know if this is a great account of that. It's just not that the information in here is inaccurate or anything. I just don't know if it is necessarily well written, and I don't know that there's not biases in this. So there's that. And last, my favorite book that I read this month. This was published in 2018. This is All Hail the House Gods by Andrew J. Stone. I was like really blown away by this book. This is one of the strangest books I've ever read. I almost said I've ever written. I've never written a book. This is one of the strangest books I've ever read. I really don't know how to even describe this to you. It's strange and dystopian. It takes place in a world where people do not live in houses anymore because the houses eat people and they're sentient, and it's like people live away from houses in tents, and they're like coupled together. They're encouraged to reproduce very over and over again, but they don't see this as, they're raised to not see this as strange or abnormal or bad or like exhausting or anything like that. And like yearly they should have produced another offspring, and then the children are raised separately, and once a day a house eats a person. And that's what happens in this world until a parent of a sacrificed child is like, oh, actually, I don't like this. And even the sacrifices, you know, everyone sees this as an honor until they don't. And so that's what this is about. And I was super blown away by this book. I really liked it so much. And if you're to read any book in this pile, I think it should be this one. It was so good. Those are the books that I read in the first half of October. I would love to know if you've read any of these, what you thought about them, what your favorite books are that you have read so far this month, if you've done any fun October activities that you'd like to share. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later.